What happened in the next 30 seconds left Dr. Ben Carson utterly speechless and may have changed how America perceives moral authority and politics forever. The renowned neurosurgeon and former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development thought he could challenge Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's character on live television, but he was completely unprepared for the response she had in store. Armed not with political rhetoric but with scripture, Crockett turned Carson's own faith against him. The Bible verse she quoted didn't just silence him, it dismantled his carefully crafted image of moral superiority. But before we delve into this viral confrontation that has set the internet ablaze, do let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more of these gripping political showdowns. It all unfolded in a tense House Oversight Committee hearing. Dr. Carson, now 72, known for his soft-spoken manner and devout Christian beliefs, was seated across from 43-year-old Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a civil rights lawyer from Texas who has quickly become one of the most fearless and outspoken voices in Washington. Carson had been invited to speak on urban housing policy. Crockett, meanwhile, sat poised with her notes, known for her piercing questions and unshakable principles. On the surface, all seemed routine, but a storm was brewing, one that would culminate in a moment now etched into modern political history. Dr. Carson is a man celebrated for his rise from poverty in Detroit to medical brilliance, famously separating conjoined twins and becoming a symbol of the American dream, a devout Seventh-day Adventist. His life story and best-selling books like Gifted Hands and America the Beautiful positioned him as a conservative icon. As HUD Secretary under Trump, and later a frequent guest on right-wing media, he cast himself as the Republican Party's moral compass, gentle in tone, yet steadfast in belief. But his legacy at HUD was far from untarnished. Lavish expenditures like the infamous £25,000 dining set and £130,000 in lounge furnishings raised eyebrows, especially while homelessness surged under his watch. Ethics questions loomed over decisions that appeared to benefit his family's business interests. Still, conservative media lionized him as a statesman. Carson, for his part, basked in the image of a gentle servant of God, dispensing wisdom from his lived experience. In contrast stood Jasmine Crockett, young, unapologetic, progressive, and deeply rooted in faith. The Dallas attorney had built her career fighting for the voiceless police brutality victims, disenfranchised voters, and underrepresented communities. Raised in a working-class home and guided by her grandmother's Bible teachings, activism wasn't performative, it was a calling. She taught Sunday school, nearly pursued ministry, and wielded scripture not as decoration but as weaponized truth. Her religious roots ran deep, and unlike many politicians who used faith as a political shield, Crockett used it as a sword. As the hearing opened, Carson calmly fielded typical questions about budgets and policies, offering his standard answers in his trademark mellow tone. But Crockett, listening closely, noticed a disturbing pattern. He was dodging accountability, deflecting blame onto local officials, and speaking about affected communities with academic detachment. When her turn came, she didn't begin with housing policy. Instead, she asked, "Dr. Carson, you've spoken extensively about personal responsibility and moral character. In your view, what role does personal accountability play in public service?" Carson, appearing relaxed, responded with practiced ease. "Public servants must exemplify integrity, fiscal responsibility, and always prioritize the people's needs." It sounded noble, but Crockett wasn't done. "So when you spent £25,000 of taxpayer money on a dining set while cutting funding for homeless families, how exactly did that reflect those moral standards?" The room fell into silence. Carson's smile vanished. Republican committee members shifted uncomfortably, attempting to regain ground. Carson offered a familiar defense. The purchase had been made by career staff and was within legal limits. But Crockett pressed harder. "You told us public servants must put the people's needs first. How does spending £25,000 on furniture meet that standard when families are being evicted?" Then Carson made a critical misstep. Rather than respond substantively, he questioned Crockett's own character. With a dramatic pause, He adopted the tone of a disappointed patriarch. "Congresswoman, I'm troubled, not just by your questions, but by your entire approach to public service," he began, claiming she prioritized social media over policy and divided rather than healed. He even questioned her understanding of moral leadership and faith, casting himself as a humble servant of God, while implying she was spiritually misguided. It was a calculated blow, one intended to diminish her credibility and elevate his own. Carson clearly expected praise from conservative viewers and approval from Republicans in the room. Indeed, some seemed impressed. Jim Jordan smirked, and quiet applause rippled through conservative spectators. Carson pressed on, listing his medical and public achievements, invoking scripture to ask what fruit Crockett's politics had borne. "By their fruit, ye shall know them," he concluded, seemingly delivering a final, damning judgment on her moral standing. But Crockett didn't flinch. As Carson preached, she sat completely still, no longer taking notes, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Those who knew her recognized the shift. She was no longer preparing a political response. She was preparing to dismantle him on the very ground he had chosen, Scripture. The room sensed it. Even the committee chair, James Comer, tried to interrupt, asking Carson to return to policy, but Carson, buoyed by perceived victory, waved him off, insisting, "Character matters." Then came the silence. Crockett looked up and locked eyes with Carson. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unyielding. "Since you've chosen to question my moral character and invoke faith in this discussion," she said, "let me respond. With the words of Jesus Christ himself." Carson's eyes widened. Crockett continued, her tone gaining strength as she recited from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verses 3 through 5. "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's." The silence that followed was deafening. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Republican committee members looked down at their papers. Democratic members tried not to smile. The gallery sat in stunned silence, absorbing the gravity of what had just taken place. Jasmine Crockett had just responded to Carson's moral attack using the very words of Jesus on hypocrisy, and she wasn't done. Her voice carried the confident tone of someone who knew precisely what they were talking about. "You've just questioned my moral character," she began, her voice steady, "while sitting as a witness in a hearing about your department's failures to house the homeless. You criticized my social media presence, all while defending the use of $31,000 on furniture money that could have housed a family for a year." She paused, allowing the words to sink in like a heavy blanket across the room. "You spoke about prioritizing people's needs, yet your policies led to a 12% increase in homelessness in major cities. You spoke of moral leadership, while your department was under investigation for ethical violations connected to your family's business interests. You referenced knowing people by their fruits, while your fruits include luxury spending during a homelessness crisis. This wasn't vague political rhetoric." Crockett's remarks were sharp, pointed, and fact-based, delivered with the composure of someone who had done their homework. She lowered her voice slightly, yet it remained perfectly audible in the silent room. "You had the audacity, the breathtaking audacity, to question my moral development while your record reflects a consistent preference for personal comfort over public service." She leaned forward, eyes locked onto Carson's increasingly pale face. "Dr. Carson, let me make one thing clear. When you question my character, you're not just questioning me, you're questioning every person who's ever been homeless, every family struggling to pay rent, every mother unsure where her children will sleep tonight, because I am their voice in this room, and I will not let their advocate be silenced by someone whose record shows so little care for their suffering." Carson had expected either an angry outburst he could dismiss or a weak defense he could dismantle. Instead, he faced someone just as familiar with scripture as he wasn't unafraid to use it. Carson began, struggling to recover his composure. "I think you're mischaracterizing my record." But Crockett wasn't about to let him regroup. Dr. Carson, I'm not mischaracterizing anything. I'm holding you accountable, which is exactly what Jesus calls us to do. You see, I don't just talk about faith, I live it. And part of living my faith means calling out hypocrisy when it hurts the very people Jesus told us to care for. Leaning forward again, her voice unwavering, she continued, "You want to talk about my social media presence? I use every platform. I have to fight for justice, to speak truth to power, and to defend those who can't defend themselves. When I post about police brutality, that's my faith in action. When I call out politicians who claim to follow Jesus while ignoring the poor, that too is my faith in action. And when I refuse to stay silent while people like you question my character to defend harmful policies, that is my faith in action." The room erupted. Democratic members nodded emphatically. Progressive observers in the gallery burst into applause before being swiftly silenced by the chair. Conservative observers sat in awkward silence, realizing that their champion had just been outmatched by someone who knew the Bible better than he did. Carson looked around, desperate for support. None came. Even his usual allies on the committee were at a loss. Crockett wasn't finished. She had one final blow prepared, one that would utterly dismantle Carson's moral authority. "Since you brought up moral development and knowing people by their fruits," she said, "let me quote one more verse from Luke 6:41. You see the speck in your brother's eye, but fail to notice the log in your own." She paused, letting the scripture echo through the silence. The log in your eye, Dr. Carson, is plain for everyone to see except you. You oversaw policies that increased human suffering while enriching yourself and your family through questionable contracts, extravagant spending, and what can only be described as moral indifference. Her tone turned more prophetic. "The speck you claim to see in my eye is your perception that I dare, with righteous audacity, to call out your hypocrisy in public, that I refuse to let your calm voice and polished image shield you from accountability. Dr. Carson, I don't just tweet about justice, I fight for it, every single day. When I post about police brutality, I speak for mothers who will never see their sons come home. When I call out politicians who invoke Jesus while neglecting the poor, I continue the prophetic tradition that stretches from Isaiah to Martin Luther King Jr. This isn't social media drama. It's a moral duty." The room fell silent once more, every ear tuned to her words. Carson tried again to respond. "Congresswoman, I think we should focus on policy, not personal attacks." But Crockett cut in, precise and composed. "Dr. Carson, you made it personal when you questioned my moral character. I'm simply replying in the language you chose, the language of faith and morality. And in that language your record speaks for itself." Cameras captured Carson's expression at that moment. The look of a man who had lost control of a situation he thought he could dominate. His soft-spoken confidence had been dismantled by someone wielding equal intellect, deeper conviction, and absolute fearlessness. As Crockett concluded, something unprecedented happened. Democratic members broke into applause. Progressive observers stood up, cheering, despite the chair's attempts to restore order. Even a few Republicans looked quietly impressed. Carson remained seated, visibly stunned. The moral high ground he'd relied on had collapsed beneath him. Within minutes, social media erupted. Crockettaviscasone, #BiblicalSMACK, and #Jesus would not approve began trending. A clip of Crockett quoting scripture had already gone viral. Progressive activists called it the most powerful use of scripture in modern politics. Even some conservatives conceded that she had brought receipts straight from the good book. People weren't just reposting the video, they were adding their own biblical commentaries. Progressive Christians flooded Twitter with verses about hypocrisy, justice, and defending the poor. Ben Shapiro tweeted, "Whether you agree with her or not, Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in using someone's moral framework against them." Carson walked in like David but forgot who had the sling. Joy Reid added, "When someone questions your morality and you respond with Jesus' own words, chef's kiss, that's what prophetic witness looks like." Most telling were the responses from ordinary believers. A viral TikTok from a young Atlanta pastor said, "That wasn't politics, that was prophetic." She didn't just quote the Bible, she lived it. Carson's team scrambled into damage control. He appeared on Fox News with Sean Hannity that evening, hoping to reframe the narrative, but even in friendly territory, Carson looked shaken. "I think the Congresswoman misunderstood me," he offered meekly. "I wasn't questioning her faith, just her methods," Hannity pushed back. "Ben, she hit you with scripture and policy specifics. What's your response?" Carson fumbled, offering vague statements about complexity and integrity. The moment fell flat. The following day, on Steve Bannon's podcast, Carson tried to accuse Crockett of weaponizing scripture. But even Bannon challenged him. "Didn't you quote scripture first? And didn't she reply with Jesus's exact words? How is that?" Weaponizing conservative support wavered. Some even criticized Carson for walking into an obvious trap. Meanwhile, Crockett was being hailed as a rising star. AOC tweeted, "This is what it looks like when someone lives their faith." Elizabeth Warren called her response brilliant. Reverend William Barber said, "She didn't attack his faith, she held it up to scripture. That's what prophets do." Faith communities began discussing the confrontation in sermons and Bible studies. Progressive seminaries used it as a case study. Even some conservative Christians acknowledged that Carson's self-righteous tone contradicted Jesus's teachings on humility. The fallout marked a turning point. Carson's role as the moral conscience of his party was damaged. His speeches grew more cautious. The man who once wielded gentle authority now sounded hesitant, unsure. Meanwhile, Crockett's national profile soared. Her fusion of sharp policy, critique, theological knowledge, and fearless conviction became a template for the new era of political engagement. This wasn't just a political win. It redefined how moral authority works in public life. Crockett didn't just respond, she rewrote the rules. From now on, anyone claiming the moral high ground would need to be ready for someone who knows that ground better and is prepared to hold them accountable with their own values.